Welcome to the Irish Baptist College podcast, Let's Talk. Today we have a special one-off episode with our summer school speaker, Dr Tony Watkins. So Tony, we're delighted that you can join us today.
Great pleasure.
Great. I'm your host, as always, Davey Ellison, Director of Training here at the Irish Baptist College and Teach Old Testament. And so I've been particularly thrilled to have a summer school, 2 full days on the book of Ezekiel. So Tony, we're really glad that after teaching 6 sessions across 2 days through all 48 chapters of Ezekiel, you're willing to sit on a podcast for half an hour.
48 chapters. we were a little. We mentioned them all.
Well, there was definitely a verse from each chapter read or quoted or referenced through the session. So we're really grateful for that. Maybe for those who weren't at summer school but are listening to the podcast, you could give us just a brief history, who you are, where you're from, and maybe just include something of your conversion story in there as well.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in a Christian family. My father was a congregational pastor. So I grew up believing. He was not an evangelical, so I didn't. But he loved the Lord, and my mother did as well, and so. Yeah, I took on their faith quite easily, and then went through a process as a teenager of questioning, is this mine or not? Yeah. And I think it was a questioning of do I believe this for myself rather than coming to faith. But I'm not entirely sure. So at some point during this process, I knew I was a believer in the Lord Jesus. But it was although he was not an evangelical, it gave me a good grounding in Scripture and faith. So it was just part of the air that I breathed, really. And then I went into physics teaching to start with, but always with a sense of, I think the Lord probably wants me to be more devoted to kind of classic ministry stuff rather than ministry in the workplace or whatever. I love teaching, but so I became a UCCF staff worker for a while, and then worked for many years in engaging with media and culture, alongside which I had an obsession with the Old Testament prophets. And so eventually I did a PhD looking at the relationship between the prophets and contemporary culture, because that's the obvious thing to do. And that got me into the world of academic biblical scholarship. I'd been reading a lot for years, but actually to be doing robust academic work was a new thing for me. And that then opened the door to my current work, which is as Fellow for Public Engagement at Tyndale House in Cambridge. Tyndale House is an international research centre for the academic study of the Bible. It's both a brilliant physical resource of a library, but a community of evangelical biblical scholars. It's a world-leading institution in very many ways. There's nowhere quite like it for that mix of the one of the best resources for biblical scholarship, and to have all of these great people coming through from people from the majority world who may be doing PhD work or doing intensive language study, visiting scholars who are at the absolute peak of their field, but they're coming to write their 27th book on whatever it is, and there are some people doing PhDs there, and pastors will come through to do sermon prep. So there's a range of people, mostly working at postgrad level. And my role is Fellow for Public Engagement, which needed somebody with kind of the weird mixed background that I had. So with a background in communications and engaging with media and understanding culture, but also committed to Scripture and to biblical scholarship. So it's a role that is partly academic, partly communications. It's to take the scholarship that happens at Tyndale House and to make that accessible to the wider church. So I do speaking, writing, podcasting, editing, video editing, even connecting with churches and colleges and networks, and from time to time, some of my own academic work.
Which we've been the beneficiaries of. So Tyndale House podcast is excellent. As long as listeners have listened to this first and can spare the time, then they can listen to Tyndale House.
I guess that's reasonable.
And your colleagues will probably not thank me for saying this. I'm guessing you probably have the most difficult job at Tyndale House to some extent, Because of the level of scholarship that happens there,
Right.
and your task is to make that digestible for the wider church. That's a challenge.
Yeah, it is a challenge. Yeah,
It's exciting, but it's a great challenge.
This is the best thing of it. I've had a great career, but this is the best thing I've ever done. I just love Tyndale House, and I love what I do, and partly because of the variety of it all, because I'm doing so many different things, and I get to stick my fingers in many different pies.
Yeah.
So although I'm at my happiest doing Old Testament stuff like Ezekiel over the last couple of days, that's just been such a treat. But I also need to engage with New Testament scholarship and scholarship on the reliability of the Bible or historical trustworthiness of the Old Testament. Whatever.
Yeah.
So it is great. So that yes, there are ways in which that is hard, but yeah, I'm just a serial kind of dabbler in things in some ways. So at another level, it's very easy. I just need to try and get the hang of what they're talking about, and then write something that I can understand.
Good.
Yeah, so I'm not sure it's the hardest job. But,
Okay.
But I'm also not sure that many of my colleagues would necessarily want to do my job.
No. Yes, because making something understandable, you obviously need to understand it at a certain level, but then making that understandable for a wider audience, you need to have a good comprehension to be able to do that, to break it down for people. So that's definitely a challenge, especially if it's in a field that you haven't done advanced study at. Yeah. But you have done advanced study in the prophets. That was your PhD work, and we've benefited from some of your thoughts on Ezekiel. So you revealed to us that you've had a 30-year love affair with the book of Ezekiel.
Yeah.
And I did ask you yesterday morning when we were starting, what was your favourite thing about Ezekiel? So I'll ask you again.
Well, two things really. One is that he has this most extraordinary vision of who God is. The book opens with that, with this incredible vision of the glory of God on mobile chariot throne, on the plains of Babylon, and just that sense of the Lord's greatness and majesty, and his absolute sovereignty and absolute holiness. It's such a big vision of God. And of course, all the Scripture gives us a big vision of God, but it just feels so vivid in Ezekiel, partly because of the vision, partly because of the language that he uses. And he impresses on us that the glory of God's holy name is the most important value there is in existence. He says, I'm doing this for the sake of my holy name. And that's quite something that we need to take more seriously, and I need to take more seriously. So that's on the one hand, and the other is the flip side of that there is so much shocking, devastating indictment of human sinfulness, particularly in the really graphic chapters of like 16 and 23, and they're really shocking to read. But other chapters as well, he puts his finger on sin in a way that I can't escape. I can be a little bit Teflon-y for some of the things that Paul says in his letters, and it just skims off without me having to take it to. No, it's not that I don't take it seriously, but I don't necessarily. They feel so familiar that I don't necessarily stop to really dwell on the implication of what Paul's saying. This is my weakness as a being more inclined towards the Old Testament in my scholarship. But I don't feel like, despite my familiarity with the prophets, I don't feel like they can let me get away with that. Because their language is so shocking and confrontational, and the judgment they announce is so severe, and the imagery they use is so vivid, that it means to make sense of it, you have to stop and slow down and reflect on what's really being said. But it's so profoundly uncomfortable that I can't escape from it. So they grab hold of me and they will not let go. So it confronts me with my sin to a greater extent. So the two of those are really the two poles of life, aren't they? Really getting to grips with the glory of God and the depths of human sin.
And the way in which the prophets then pin those things together as well is, it's just compelling.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. I'm not giving up this obsession anytime soon.
Yes, well, I think I teach Old Testament here, so I think my colleagues will find me insufferable for the next few weeks. I've been inspired and encouraged on that front. I'm trying to count up in my head. I think we've had 6 to 8 hours of teaching from you over the last 2 days on Ezekiel, something in around there. We can't repeat all of that now on the podcast, but maybe there's somebody listening and they're coming up to Ezekiel in their daily readings, or they haven't decided what they're going to read next, and they've always wanted to read Ezekiel, and they think,
as most people have,
I couldn't do it. I want to challenge myself, but it's scary. So 2 or 3 pieces of advice for someone just about to read Ezekiel for themselves. What do they need to keep in mind, or what information might be helpful for them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think one is get the historical context clear first. So read 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles in particular. Well, you probably better read all of Kings and Chronicles, but the latter parts of those, which set out the end of the northern kingdom of Israel from 722, and then the years of continual decline of Judah, the southern kingdom, having divided in 931 after the death of Solomon, until they get to the Babylonian exile. So what's going on with those kings, and why does this happen, and what is happening? The people being taken into exile, and a puppet king being put on the throne, Zedekiah, and so to get that historical context clear, I think is one really helpful thing, and I think that applies to all of the prophets.
Definitely.
Second thing I would say is pay particular attention to the 3 great visions of God's glory that Ezekiel has. These frame the book in some ways. Chapter 1, chapters 8 to 11, and then 40 to 48, but particularly 43, where he sees the glory of God, which should be in the Holy of Holies in the temple back in Jerusalem, but he's there with them in exile, which is an extraordinary thing for Ezekiel to witness. And in chapter 11, God says to Ezekiel, or through Ezekiel, I've been a small sanctuary for you in exile, or I've been a sanctuary for you for a while in exile. So here is God not in Jerusalem, not in the dwelling place of the Lord's name in the temple, but with the exiles where they are. Then 8 to 11 is the glory departing from the temple, abandoning Jerusalem because of the idolatry and the wickedness. And then in the vision of the new temple, 40 to 48, you see in 43 the glory of God returning to the city, or it's a heavenly city, I think, and filling this heavenly temple again, and never to leave. Now this is Yahweh's dwelling place forever. The name of the city is Yahweh is there. So I think to get those 3 things, to that what God is doing in appearing with the exiles and in abandoning the temple and Jerusalem because of its wickedness, and promising this new future where he re-enters the temple. I think that frames the book really helpfully. And then if you have that, then some of the tricky detail bits along the way, it's okay to skip over that because you've got the bigger picture of what's going on, I think. So that's the second thing. And then maybe to keep on pressing on through some of the trickiness and some of the things that feel a bit repetitive to us. I think there's a reason for the repetitiveness, but some things do feel, especially the measurements in 40 to 48, they feel quite well worked and exhaustive. But there is a reason for them, and so you may not get all the details, but there is a bigger picture, and you should be able to grasp that.
I think that's key, finding the bigger picture in books, and it helps you. Okay, these 2 chapters, I don't know what's going on, but they fit into this bigger picture somehow, and it just kind of helps helps you either move through it, or sometimes you get a spark of inspiration and think, oh, okay, that's how that fits. That's really helpful.
Maybe because thinking one other thing as well, which is a kind of a bigger framework for thinking about the prophets, which is I think they are both in the oracles of judgment and the promises of salvation and blessing. They have a vision of how life ought to be.
Yeah.
So a vision of, I talk about it as four-dimensional shalom, so a flourishing relationship with God, with other people, with the world in which we live, and with ourselves. And true flourishing is when all of these things are flourishing. That's the new creation state that we are waiting for. That at the moment we experience alienation in all those dimensions, and so the prophets are challenging what causes that alienation. Why have we failed in our relationship with God? Why have we failed in our relationship with other people? And because of your failure, this is what's going to happen to you. This is the judgment that God is bringing. He'll take away the flourishing you think you have because you're not paying attention to Him. So you are facing this discipline, but His longing is for you to turn and to experience that. And so to see what is the good that the Lord wants for us, that is implicit even in the darkest passages of judgment.
Great, excellent. And if listeners or viewers want to see anything more, they can go to the college YouTube page, and most, if not all, of those lectures are up now. All of them are up. I think I'm getting a nod from Matt. So that's great.
Just requires some patience.
No, that's really good. Maybe we can pivot a little bit from Old Testament prophecy to the Bible in its totality. So 2026, the 500th anniversary of William Tyndale's New Testament, which was the first, sorry, I'm going to steal your thunder, first to be translated from Greek into English. So there were prior English Bibles, but this was the first to be translated. So we'll talk a bit about that. I'm going to point people to Tyndale House's magazine, which used to be called Think, but which is now the World of the Bible. And this edition is exclusively on William Tyndale, and a number of excellent articles in here. So who is William Tyndale? Can you give us a brief intro to who this individual is?
So born in the early 1490s in South Gloucestershire in England, son of clothworking merchants. That is a little significant because the context in which he's born in the 1490s is one where the only English Bible that's available is the Wycliffe, or the so-called Wycliffe translation. It was probably done by his followers, the Lollards, in the late 14th century. So that was written in Middle English, translated from Latin, and there were only handwritten manuscripts of that. So very few people would have had access. And more to the point, since 1408, it had been illegal not only to translate the Bible into English without the permission of a bishop, but even to read the Bible in English without the permission of a bishop. And I came across an account of a mother and child being burnt at the stake because they were reading a Lollard Bible. But although there was this law against heresy and the illegality of the Bible in English, the Lollards didn't just say, oh, well, that's fine, we'll forget it. They went underground and continued to meet in secret and to pass Lollard texts and scripture around. And one of their stronghold areas was South Gloucestershire, where Tyndale was from. And they were particularly strong among clothworkers, which is where Tyndale's family, that's what they were. So it is unthinkable, it seems to me, that Tyndale wouldn't have had some exposure to those Lollard kind of ideas. So it seems that probably from early on there was something of a desire to see the Bible in English. He went to Oxford to study at what was Magdalen Hall. It's now part of Hertford College. In early to mid 1500s, so he was probably still, he could have been 12, but a teenager. I mean, what teenager doesn't go to Oxford? He was being trained for the priesthood there, so it was more normal then, perhaps. And going to Oxford, particularly in Hertford, in Magdalen Hall, there was a big debate going on at the time because the Renaissance humanism was sweeping across Europe. So Christian humanism and humanism more generally, not secular humanism, but the Renaissance humanism, was saying, rather than being caught up with medieval ideas, we need to go back to the sources. So that back to the classical Greek and Roman text, but also back to the Greek and Hebrew for scripture, so that we know what the sources themselves say, that we're not relying on tradition. One of the leading lights in that was Erasmus from Rotterdam, who spent some time in Cambridge, where he started to work on what became a volume known as the Novum Instrumentum, or the New Instrument, and it was the Greek of the New Testament on one side. He had access to one single Greek manuscript, so he had to back translate a little bit of Revelation for it. And on the other side, he put Latin text, not the Vulgate, the standard Roman Catholic text that had been standard for hundreds of years, but a corrected Latin text based on his reading of the Greek. So he's saying, go back to the sources, look at what the Greek says, and then see if Jerome got the Latin right and whether the church is teaching the right things. So Erasmus was very critical of the church. So those kinds of ideas were really hot in Oxford. On the other side of the debate were the scholastics, who were all for medieval theology and how many angels are fit on the head of the pin. Tyndale became very much team humanist. And so now go back to the sources, work from the Greek and Hebrew, and this desire to have the Bible in English. And so in a few years after he left Oxford, he went to the Bishop of London, Cuthbert Tunstall, in 1523, I think it was, maybe 1524, 3 or 4, doesn't quite matter, to ask for permission to translate the Bible into English. Tunstall was a friend of Erasmus, so he would expect a favourable, oh yes, of course, go back to the sources. But no. So he was turned down. He spent the next year, must have been 1524, he spent the next year engaging with evangelical-minded merchants in London who were influenced by Luther's ideas that were coming across, particularly to an area of London called the Steelyard, the Stahlhof, which is where Cannon Street Station is. And this was the trading post for the Hanseatic League, the trading network around Europe. So all these rich trading cities, this was their trading post. So there's German merchants, especially from Cologne, who were bringing in Lutheran ideas and talking about these. And Tyndale connected with them. And so then, after about a year there, having been refused permission, he went to the continent it's what we call Germany today. Of course, it wasn't Germany then. But he went there with financial help from a merchant called Humphrey Monmouth and maybe some of these German merchants, to their contacts, presumably, and went to Cologne to try to translate the Bible, or finish it, perhaps, the New Testament, and to print it. So he started printing in 1525, got rumbled, had only printed 8 sheets, so 32 pages as far as Matthew 22. He and his assistant, William Royce, fled upriver to the city of Worms, and then in 1526, they managed to produce a whole New Testament. But I've probably now answered the next 7 questions that you had, because I just kept talking.
Well, there was obviously a lot of difficulty in producing that political opposition, religious opposition, that kind of thing. What about the difficulty of the actual task? So what manuscripts did Tyndale have access to, or how many? You said Erasmus had access to one Greek manuscript. Is that the same for Tyndale? And what were some of the challenges of translation?
Tyndale worked from Erasmus's Novum Instrumentum, as Luther had done. So Luther's September Testament of 1522. So he'd worked from Erasmus's text. So they didn't have access to the Greek manuscripts directly. So they had what Erasmus had copied out into his book, and Tyndale did the same. It seems that Tyndale would also have had the Latin text with him, and it looks like he probably also had Luther's translation. So he's not working from Luther's translation, but there are a couple of places where you can see that he's doing the same thing in English as Luther has done in German. He's taking the same approach to translating a particular word. But it is an extraordinary thing, because there were very few English scholars who could. I mean, there were some, but there were not that many English scholars who could read Greek. Even with the coming of these Renaissance ideas and back to the sources, there weren't many who could do it. But Tyndale was a brilliant linguist. One in a letter, one of his friends wrote it later on. This friend said that he is so fluent in a number of languages that the people from those countries think that he's a native speaker of it. So, I mean, he's that kind of good at language. We don't actually know what those languages are, but almost certainly it's going to be German because of where he was. He ended up in Antwerp, so probably Flemish, probably French, possibly Spanish, German, Greek, Latin. So he
smart cookie.
I mentioned German already, and then he learnt Hebrew while he was there, probably while he was in Worms. Seems he spent a bit of time in Wittenberg. Whether he met Luther there or not, we don't know. There's no record of that, but it looks like he was in Wittenberg for a while. He may have begun to pick up Hebrew there, but probably in Worms where there was a Jewish population.
And he translated some of the Old Testament, but not. He didn't finish all of it.
No, that's right. So the 1526. Translation of the New Testament. So it was, as you say, it was the first to be translated from Greek. It was the first in modern English because the Middle English of Wycliffe was now fading away, and few people could read it. So he's right at the very birth of modern English.
Yeah.
And so when you look at the 1526 edition, the spelling is all over the place, and there's not always a consistency of grammar.
Yeah.
But you read it, actually, it doesn't take long to get into the spelling and the black letter font. Mm-hmm. And so much of it feels fresh. You read the Beatitudes, and it sounds almost exactly like the Beatitudes, even in an NIV today, which was a new translation working from Greek. And yet Tyndale phrasing is so much baked into our thinking that they end up translating in the same kind of way. So it can feel very familiar. But then in 1534, his second edition, he's corrected a lot of issues, but there's much more standardization. So in many ways, Tyndale standardized English for us, which is interesting. But having done the New Testament, he started work on the Old Testament, and he collaborated with Miles Coverdale. In this, Coverdale didn't have Greek and Hebrew. He was working from Latin and German, but there was some collaboration. In fact, Tyndale sailed up the coast to Hamburg to spend some time with Coverdale and was shipwrecked and lost all of his papers and had to start all over again. But nevertheless, 1530, he published the Pentateuch, the first 5 books, and he was unique at that point among English people in being able to read both Greek and Hebrew, as far as we can tell. So he is absolutely the man for the task. And then he did Jonah in 1531, which might feel an odd thing to do next, but Luther had done Pentateuch and then Jonah.
Okay,
so
he's just following Luther probably.
And that's as much as he had published during his lifetime. There was some theological works as well. But then after he died, his friend John Rogers, who was with Tyndale chaplain of what's called the English Merchant's House in Antwerp, where Tyndale went sometime in the 1530s. It seems we're not exactly sure when he went there. John Rogers somehow has all of Tyndale's papers, including a lot of unpublished translation. And he puts all of that into a complete Bible called the Matthew Bible in 1537. And so that is all of Tyndale's New Testament, all of Tyndale's Old Testament translation, which actually goes as far as 2 Chronicles, plus Jonah, and then the rest was from Miles Coverdale, who by that point had published his own Bible, the Coverdale Bible, 1535, but that was entirely working from Latin and German. Okay.
Yeah. How big a deal is it that Tyndale translated it? So I think, can you give us some kind of impression about what kind of watershed moment that was for us as English speakers, having a Bible in our own language?
It's just incalculable, really. I think is not an exaggeration. So we said first to be translated from Greek, first in modern English, and the first to be printed. So Tyndale is not only the right man for the job, he's the right man at the right time in the right place. So he's got the right contacts because of these German merchants that put him in touch with printers in Germany, in Cologne. So although that printing was rumbled, the 1526 edition in Worms, it's printed only half the size. So the Cologne edition, there's one copy of that surviving, which is in the British Library. That's quarto size, so 4 pages on a sheet, and it includes a prologue that Tyndale wrote and a woodcut of Matthew, and then the first 22 chapters of Matthew's Gospel. For 1526, he went to half the size, octavo size, so 8 pages on a sheet, and he dropped all of his prologues. He dropped all the marginal notes and just little woodcuts at the beginning of each chapter or of each book, and so it's a much scaled down thing. And that, of course, that meant it was easier to smuggle in because it was illegal to have the Bible in English. All of these copies had to be smuggled in. Maybe even up to 3,000 or 4,000 of them. It's difficult to know exactly. There are documents that suggest 6,000, but it may be significantly less than that. Smuggled in, mostly hidden in bales of cloth to various places in England and Scotland, and it made its way over here as well, of course, to the island of Ireland, and so for the first time, with the exception of those few people who've been able to get sight of a Lollard Bible, for the first time people had access to the Bible in their own language. And Tyndale was passionate about this. There's a famous encounter, it may be allegorical, John Foxe talks about it in Foxe's Book of Martyrs that was published in 1567, so about 30 years after Tyndale died. And he tells a story of Tyndale meeting, I think in Foxe's version, it's a monk at a dinner party at a house where Tyndale was a chaplain in Gloucestershire. But I'm pretty sure there's another version, I think in one of Tyndale's books, in which he has a debate with the Chancellor of Worcester Cathedral. So I'm not quite sure who it is, but some clerical person established in the church who is arguing with Tyndale about this guy says, I would rather be without God's laws than the Pope's. And Tyndale is rejecting the Pope's authority, or at least questioning it. And Tyndale says, I defy the Pope and all his laws. And before many years are out, if God spare my life, I will cause the ploughboy to know more of the scriptures than you do. So that's, he's true to his word. He doesn't just translate into modern English, but he translates into a modern English that is, it's not colloquial, but it is accessible to ordinary people. And he either invents or popularizes loads of words and phrases. I mean, clearly some of them are original to him, and some his is the first documented use. So there are 822 entries in the Oxford English Dictionary for which Tyndale's work is the first documented use. So words like scapegoat, Passover, Jehovah. I mean, we don't tend to use the word Jehovah now, but that was his rendering of the Hebrew that has the consonants YHWH, Yahweh, or JHWH, and then the vowel pointings for the word Lord, Adonai. And so he rendered that as Jehovah. So he's the first person to do that. There are words like daybreak and pleasure that have never, it's the first documented use. He probably didn't come up with those, but they're actually daybreak is the kind of word that Tyndale does like to coin, where he's putting a couple of things together. And then loads of phrases that are familiar to us. My brother's keeper, the salt of the earth, fight the good fight. And so there are many resonant phrases that have just become part of our language. So he has not only given the English people the Bible that they can access for the first time in significant numbers, but he's given us modern English. And without Tyndale, there would be no Shakespeare.
And I think the accessibility of Tyndale for modern readers, when they can see a slightly modernized version of the text, it doesn't read like 16th century literature. It reads like contemporary literature, which is testament to his ability with language to make it accessible, and that it stood the test of time.
And as I say, so much of it feels familiar.
Yeah.
A book came out in April by a scholar, David Crystal. He's the guy who looked at all of these entries in the Oxford English Dictionary.
Okay.
So these are Tyndale's first use. But he also developed new metrics for measuring how much of Tyndale's work survives through the Matthew Bible, the Great Bible, the Bishop's Bible, the Geneva Bible, into the actually even the Douay-Rheims Catholic translation. Even they use Tyndale, which is hilarious. And how much of that survives into the King James? And there are all sorts of figures bandied around. I've seen 80% of the King James version is Tyndale, which is obviously nonsense because he'd only actually translated half of the Bible. And there's a big chunk that he hadn't even done. So, but anyway, David Crystal looked at the other way around and said how much of Tyndale's work survives recognisably into the AV, the Authorised Version of the King James, and it's about 70% of all of his translation work still lives on into the King James. So of course that shaped generations of English-speaking Christians.
Yeah, definitely.
It's absolutely incredible.
Yeah, great, excellent. And if people want to find out more, they've got to pick up this magazine.
There's the magazine. We've done a 4-part podcast series on it. And of course, the other thing about Tyndale is that he was prepared to die for this. You know, he was so passionate about giving people the Bible in English that he was prepared to die. I mean, technically, he was executed for heresy. And in practice, because the king Henry VIII didn't like his position on his marital business with Anne Boleyn. But Tyndale was defiant in his producing English text, and while he's in prison, he writes a letter effectively to the governor saying, "Please, can I have some warmer clothes? But please, please, can I have my Hebrew Bible and my Hebrew dictionary?" So that I can get on with the job of translation.
Yes, I read that in the magazine. I was really struck by that. That's what I don't mind having a coat to be a bit warmer, but definitely bring my Bibles and my grammars.
It's brilliant, isn't he? Yeah. So he's an absolute hero.
Now, all of that has a bearing.
Did I mention our podcast series?
Yes, you did mention. Yes, 4-part podcast series on Tyndale. Obviously, all of this has a bearing then on translations and us reading our Bible today in English. So first of all, it should make us treasure the different translations that we have and how good all of them are and how indebted lots of them are to previous English translations, but then also the wealth of manuscripts that lie behind our modern English translations. But all translations are interpretations, I think you've written in this magazine. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit and just help us think about English translation, contemporary English translations? Yeah,
sure. So Tyndale knew that his work was provisional. In his introduction to his 1526, he said, this will be improved on. So he and Tunstall and Thomas More accused him of having 2,000 errors in it. Some of those were translation errors. Many of them were more theological issues. But he did correct many things and improved his translation in 1536. And he saw the whole translation process as being an ongoing process of getting better and better, because there is no one-to-one correspondence between one language and another language. Even two closely related languages like Spanish and Portuguese, people can understand each other fairly easily, but even there isn't necessarily always a direct correspondence between how a word works in Spanish and how a word works in Portuguese. That becomes even more the case when you're translating different kinds of languages. So between Greek and English, you've got much more. A word in Greek can carry much more nuance than a word in English, or vice versa. Even more with Hebrew, that has a limited vocabulary, an enormous semantic range. And so you can't just translate the word shalom for peace in every instance. It just doesn't work, or many other words. So, and then it's not just about whether or not there's a one-to-one correspondence, but what are the idioms here, and how does that idiom translate into a different language? So there's any translation, therefore, is an interpretation, because the people doing the translation have to say, what's the best way of rendering this in this language at this point in time in this particular place? And that might not be the place might not be the same for speakers of that same language in another part of the country, even where things are a little bit different. Never mind in a different part of the world, and language changes. So the way that we translate into English in Tyndale's time is not going to be quite the same as it was in 1611 when the King James Version came out, and it's certainly not the same as we would have now. And we still continue to have new translations because, well, there are a couple of reasons why we keep having new translations. One is that English keeps changing, and the other is that it's very financially profitable for publishing companies to produce a Bible, because that funds everything else. So there is a commercial reason for having lots of translations as well. I mean, that's just the sad reality of life. So we do. I think we need multiple translations, because with all the different nuances of going from one language to another, different kinds of translation will do it slightly differently. So a translation that wants to be more word for word of translation, and obviously there's limits to that because of different word order in different languages and so on. So something like the ESV is trying to be more word for word, whereas something like the NIV is trying to be more thought for thought. It's trying to capture what this sentence means rather than word and how those work. So you get a smoother flow of language rather than feeling a bit clunky, but you lose things in the process. So to have the two of those, and then to have another one that has a slightly different approach, and another one that, so the more translations you can work from, the better. But even better is to go back to the source languages. Of course. So learn
I was waiting for you to put the plug in for learning the original languages. Yes, and you can do so by signing up to a course at the Irish Baptist College, and we will inform you on those fronts. And if people want to read a little bit more, I think you wrapped up this magazine really excellently with your article on Bible translations. I thought it was really helpful just to make things contemporary for us. And often people find one translation they like and sit on it and defend it for all it's worth, but there's such a benefit to letting 3 or 4 inform you. And most translations produced by committee in the modern world are trustworthy.
Yes, the committee angle is really important because there's a correction process in there. People can't be too committed to their particular angle. Tyndale translated on his own to start with out of necessity. But then as time went on, he collaborated with Coverdale and others as well. And there was just no choice for him. But yeah, for us to have a translation that's a committee translation with lots of people bringing different perspectives, and that really helps to iron out some of the idiosyncrasies. And all of our main translations, they're good translations, but none of them are perfect translations. They all
have a weakness.
Will do things that if you get to know the Hebrew and the Greek, you say, really, I'm not sure that I'd go with that. But then it's there because there's been a bunch of people who have looked at the Hebrew and Greek and said, no, we think this is right. And therefore we need to have some humility when we read our translations and say, I may not know enough. This is I've got the word of the Lord in my language. What a gift.
Yeah, and we should be grateful for that. Absolutely. And not neglect it in the way that we so often do. Yeah. Well, look, I don't want to take any more liberties. Tony, you've given us 2 days of your time, a lot of energy and effort through the book of Ezekiel, and then you've topped it off with this episode of the podcast. So we're really grateful for you coming along and sharing with us, and we hope that as you've benefited us, you've been encouraged by your time with us.
Oh, very much so. Yeah, thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, and thank you listeners for joining us, and we hope and pray this episode will continue to equip you to magnify Christ, advance the gospel, and strengthen the church.